Welcome to the Women's Fund Forum. My name is Crystal Clark, and I serve as the chair of the Women's Fund Advisory Board. Thank you for joining us this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to share a bit about the Women's Fund. The Women's Fund is an endowed fund within the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. And some of you may be familiar with our very popular fundraiser, Power of the Purse. But in addition to this event, the Women's Fund is dedicated to increasing support in Middle Tennessee for programs serving women and girls. The fund was established in 1994 by a committee of community leaders who wanted to really invest in long-term solutions for transforming the lives of women and girls. And we know that by investing in the lives of women and girls, we improve the well-being of entire communities. Now, since inception, we have awarded over $1.9 million to organizations addressing the following three areas: achievement of economic self-sufficiency for women, prevention of violence and crime against women and girls, and promotion of health and physical well-being and talent for women and girls. Now, before we move on to our panel this evening, I would like to thank some very special individuals: Valerie Nago-Shiner and Jennifer Pagliera, who serve as the forum co-chairs. Thank you both so much for your work last year and this year on this event. All past and current members of the Women's Fund Advisory Board, the team at the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee who have been instrumental in making tonight a reality, with special thank yous to Jenny Moscardelli, Amy Fair, and Ellen Lehman. The forum is our way of bringing awareness to and stimulating conversation that hopefully leads to solution-oriented thinking and action about important issues facing women in our region. Past forum topics have included the opioid epidemic, domestic violence, human trafficking, hunger, and the sandwich generation. Now, this evening, we continue our discussion about the reality of sexual assault. And we turn our focus to an environment that is near and dear to my heart, as I have spent over half my life on a college campus, first as a student, and for the past 13 years as a campus-based professional. 9 of those years have been spent right here in Middle Tennessee. Now, I've had the opportunity to work with students and support them during the highest peaks and the lowest valleys. And many of the students that I have worked with over the years are some of my absolute favorite people. And it's a real privilege to watch them navigate their college experience and go through what we hope will be a time of positive growth and development. The college campus is an incredible place. And arguably, we label college as some of the best years of our lives. And we characterize the campus as a bubble and as if it doesn't feel like it's real life. And as full of learning and innovation and memory making and fun as it can be, sometimes bordering on magical, as some of you might remember it being, it is unfortunately not absent of the reality of sexual assault. This epidemic is very present on campuses across the country, and we are honored to have an esteemed panel with us tonight to discuss this issue and the disproportionate impact on the traditional college-age population. This evening's panel will be moderated by Mira Bilal. Mira serves on the Women's Fund Advisory Board and is the founder of the Women's Healthcare Initiative. Mira?
Good evening, everybody. And Crystal, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Welcome everyone to part 2 of the reality of sexual assault in our community for women and girls. Last year, the forum touched on the step-by-step process of what happens after a sexual assault. And at that time, we learned that of the sexual assaults that were reported in Davidson County in 2018, 40% of victims were between the ages of 13 and 24. So that's nearly 3 sexual assaults a day in our community. Tonight, the forum will take a deeper dive into this most at-risk population, young women age 18 to 24. And we are calling this forum The Reality of Sexual Assault, the College Campus Edition. Let's start with some statistics by RAIN, which is the Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. So as you can see from this slide, sexual violence on campus is pervasive. 13% of all students experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, or incapacitation. Among even our graduate and professional students, 9.7% of females and 2.5% of males experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, and also incapacitation. Among our undergraduate students, 26.4% of females and 6.8% of males experience rape or sexual assault through physical force, violence, and incapacitation. And whether you're a student or a college-age adult, you are still at high risk for sexual violence. Let's take a look at a second chart that shows that college-age victims often do not report to law enforcement. Only 20% of female student victims are reporting to law enforcement, and only 32% of non-student females the same age also do not make a report. It's interesting in this slide to see some of the reasons for this, with the highest really being believing that it was a personal matter. Of course, we know that sexual assault is a crime. It is a felony in almost all states. I also think it's interesting that 20% of victims feared that if they reported it, something would happen to them, or they believed that it was not important enough to even report at all. In addition to these statistics, we also have to realize that sexual violence can often occur at a higher rate at certain times of the year. More than 50% of college sexual assaults occur in either August, September, October, or November, right as everybody's coming on campus. And we know that students are at increased risk during the first few months of their first and second semesters in college. So for those that are in their freshman year, they are especially susceptible to this issue. We also need to realize that campus law enforcement does have a significant role in responding to college sexual assault. 86% of sworn campus law enforcement officials have legal authority to make an arrest outside of the campus grounds when this happens. They also, 86%, have a staff member responsible for rape prevention programming. So they are very educated in this area. And 72% of campus law enforcement agencies have a specific staff member that is responsible for survivor response and assistance. So tonight, we are going to hear from a college administrator, a statewide training specialist on sexual assault, and a survivor of sexual assault. But before those introductions, to set the stage, I would like to share a video made from a Vanderbilt freshman, or made for Vanderbilt freshmen, by their upper class counterparts, reflecting what students in our community are doing for other students to raise awareness of the problem of sexual assault on college campuses. It's called Behind Closed Doors, doors being DORES.
What do you picture when you think of campus sexual assault? Perhaps it is headlines like these. Oftentimes, we assume stereotypes and fail to see the realities of sexual assault.
So a little while ago, a friend of mine was telling me about her experience being sexually assaulted. It was kind of in the beginning of the semester. So as the night went on, things kind of progressed a little. Her and this one guy went off into a room alone. And this guy was actually the first guy she had ever kissed a week before. The way she described it was not as like a violent situation, like as you can see in like some movies or just in society in general, but it was just like more of a passive thing. He basically coerced her again and again to have sex, and each time she kind of pushed him off and said, no, I don't want to do that. I've never done that before.
Most Most sexual assaults occur during either August, September, October, or November, and first-year students in their first semester of college are at an increased risk of experiencing sexual assault.
80% of sexual assaults that occur on college campuses are committed by an acquaintance of the victim.
43% of sexual assaults on Vanderbilt campus occur in dorms, making it the most prevalent place on campus.
My older brother, who was in college at the time, he had been sexually assaulted by a female classmate of his, and she had drugged him and then assaulted him. And when he first said that to me, I didn't really believe it, because I think that often we have these biases just regarding sexual assault in general, and we often portray the female as the victim, which is, while most of the time statistically that's the case, it doesn't take away from the fact that men can be victims too.
One in 10 bisexual men.
1 in 3 bisexual women.
1 in 4 transgendered people will be sexually assaulted during their college experience. How will you promote a culture of change?
A culture of change.
How will you promote a culture of change?
Now to introduce our esteemed panel, we have Jordan Owens joining us tonight. She is the statewide training specialist at the Sexual Assault Center in Nashville. She holds a master's in social work and has a background as a victim's advocate. We also have Cara Tuttle-Bell. She's the director of the Project Safe Center at Vanderbilt University, where she provides advocacy on all aspects of the response systems and processes associated with sexual violence. She and her team do hundreds of trainings on resident hall floors, at faculty meetings, online, and within Greek life. She's an attorney and has a master's in women's and gender studies. Both of these women are incredibly talented, and there are much more of their accomplishments outlined in their bios that are also provided online that I hope you all will have a chance to look at. So to start the questions off, just for a foundation, I would like to mention Title IX. I think a lot of us familiarize Title IX with the 1972 Act that allowed women to play sports, but of course it is much more than that. And I'm going to actually just read, it's a short statute, but the most telling component. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So this has really become, I think, this foundational piece that has helped us to have a very powerful tool to stop sexual violence and harassment in schools and colleges. And I also want to add, in August, the Trump administration added some new rules that have come into effect. So, Cara, would you mind to tell us a little bit more about how Title IX plays in the work that you do and some components about these new statutory provisions under Trump?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So I'm actually glad you read the definition, because it's really helpful, because sometimes people get confused that colleges have a role to play and it's not just a criminal matter. So Title IX is asking us to ensure an equitable academic environment. It's a civil rights law, and we have some expectations to make sure that it's equitable on the basis of gender identity. And so there certainly are times where criminal statutes and Title IX can apply. And students who experience sexual violence can choose to report to the university, to law enforcement, both, or neither. So Title IX is a 1972 law. It's not new. It's something that has become a common phrase more recently, or you've seen lots of headlines that were featured in the student video. It is interpreted to require colleges and universities to address sexual misconduct because the occurrence of sexual misconduct on the college campus disrupts the educational environment and makes it inequitable. Now, we did know for over a year that the Trump administration was working on overhauling some of the guidance that was out, and they rescinded the Obama era guidance, and they had a public comment period, and we saw some proposed regs. And so in May, we finally saw the final regulations, and they gave us a very quick turnaround time, a very tight implementation window. And so lots of colleges and universities nationwide were really rushing as quickly as we could, hustling all summer to put in what were, for many of us, very new requirements and procedures. And so to condense that to just a few talking points, it became much more formal, much more legalistic. It looks much more like what you might see on TV, for those of you who aren't lawyers, like a hearing. A live hearing is required with cross-examination. Now, the victim advocate in me is worried about that having a chilling effect, because that can be very intimidating, and that feels scary and unknown. And many victim advocates also think that's an unnecessary step, because we were in a less confrontational environment, talking to all of the parties, talking to all of the witnesses, but we were able to keep people separate, often being interviewed on separate days, certainly in separate rooms. And we were asking the questions really through, administrative staff who have training on this issue, not, a defense attorney necessarily, or a family member of the accused posing questions. That's definitely the side of it that I see. And these have the force of law, so they're not just guidance. So some people have been talking in the past week, well, is this all going to change? Well, that takes some time. I mean, we have to see. Certainly, Vice President Biden, as the vice president, weighed in on this issue a lot, and I just don't think we know yet the time frame of change, or what, if anything, would change. It did give schools choices. And I want to stress that, because many of the headlines and the news coverage on this were acting as if schools were going to do all of these things. Well, schools could choose to change their standard from preponderance to clear and convincing, or they could choose to keep preponderance of evidence as a standard. And many of them did, because that's long been used on the college campus. In the accountability procedures, those are considered educational procedures. The college and university disciplinary process is not putting anyone in prison. The worst thing a college and university can do to you is say you cannot go to school here, which can be very distressing, but is a different, outcome indeed. And they said that you could reduce the number of mandatory reporters on your campus. Some schools are, many schools are not. They just gave schools the option. And so, I think the headlines were very scary, and for survivors, certainly, and for survivor activists, they were waiting to see what schools and universities would do. But many colleges and universities have chosen to lean into those options that are in the new law, and either keep doing things the way they were as much as possible, or embrace things that could be silver linings. Like the new law gives schools the options of having an informal resolution process. Well, that is really appealing to a lot of survivors on the college campus. Some of them are very intimidated by the old version of formal procedures, certainly the new version requiring that hearing and cross-examination, but they want some opportunity to share their story and to discuss what happened and the impact with others. And that provision allowing for informal resolution, could be a place where we see some development on college and university campuses.
Tell me about, from my reading of it, it looks like the definition of sexual harassment has narrowed, because it's saying it's only including instances that are severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. by raising the bar in that way, does that functionally prevent survivors from accessing justice, in your opinion?
Yeah, that
hasn't been very long. It's only been.
It hasn't been very long, and
November.
we'll talk about this later. The pandemic means that we're probably not trying out our new practices and procedures at college and campuses the way we might be in a normal school year. But yes, that's another thing that's regularly on my talking points. So that is concerning when we're talking about sexual harassment, because what is different is that it has to meet all of those prongs, right? So the and matters. This is where lawyers can be really helpful or difficult depending on how you view it. But it's yes, severe and pervasive and objectively offensive. And so that is a very high bar. And I hope it doesn't, but many schools are left wondering, well, what do we do with the kind of less egregious, potentially less severe isolated incidents that we know we want to address, but they don't quite add up to meeting that standard. And so we're left with room kind of on the spectrum of behaviors that we want to address, but without clear guidance on what to do with those.
Thank you, Cara, so much for that. Next question, Jordan, is for you. And when we think of what makes up this 18 to 25 age group and them being especially vulnerable, my question is there a science behind it? Is there brain development or female biology or how women, the effects women are associated with alcohol that make this population more vulnerable?
Yes, short answer. So what we know about the brain and how it develops is that the most logical part of your brain, the part of your brain that's responsible for reasoning and being able to put words to feelings and things like that, develops last. And we know that from what research is saying, it doesn't fully develop until about age 25. And more research is saying that it may be as late as age 30. And so I come into play when speaking about this 18 to 24 year old group, especially they're new to campus. A lot of them are away from their families for the first time, or they have these ideas of what they think a college life is supposed to look like. And so what they're trying to do is fulfill all of these dreams and things that they feel they're supposed to do. And also they're always asking the question, well, who am I, or who am I going to become, right? And so when you think about that and think about them being on campus, not being established, not having their community established yet, not being familiar with resources, I think that makes them particularly more vulnerable to assault. And then also not having the support they need afterwards. And a statistic also that's out there is that almost 50% of campus assaults happen while alcohol and drugs are involved. And that's a huge number. That's almost half of the assault. And so what we know about drugs and alcohol is that, one, you're not able to give consent when you're under the influence of drugs and alcohol. That's the first thing. The second thing that we know is that it affects people differently, especially this group. What we know is that the smaller you are, the more out of whack your eating patterns are or your sleeping patterns are, the more intoxicated you may become. And what we know about college students is that they don't sleep often, they don't eat well, sometimes not at all. They're typically smaller. All of these things make them more susceptible to a higher level of incapacitation or intoxication. And it also brings into play date rape drugs, which are very accessible. They're very cheap. And easy to come by. And they also, a lot of them eliminate from your body pretty quickly. And so even if a survivor is to get or seek medical help or attention afterwards, the date rape drug may not even be detectable by the time they go to get whatever help that they need. So Cara, did you have something that you wanted to add to that too?
I'm just nodding in agreement with you, Jordan. I mean, that's what we see, and it's hard to overstate the role of alcohol when we're talking about the college environment. It just shows up so often.
Mm-hmm. What about power dynamics that are in place? And I'm thinking of like the book Sexual Citizens, Jordan, that we discussed, which was the study at Columbia University that asked kids kind of what is sex, and maybe you can share some of their responses that book that were very eye-opening.
Yeah. So with sexual assault, a lot of people think it's about sexual gratification or being attracted to somebody else. And that's one of the most common rape myths or misconceptions, because what's sexual assault, what's at the root of that is power and control. It's all about exerting power, domination, manipulation over another person. And so we see that with college students, especially freshmen. We see the power dynamics with age. They're typically younger than all of the other students on campus. We see that with status. They're not established. They don't have a community. They're not necessarily commodities to the university as someone else would be, as say an athlete or a Greek student, right? Again, the sheer size of them, being sober, being able to consent to sex, all of these things play a part in the power dynamics. And what we know about the biology of men and women, and not to make this a binary topic, because again, this happens outside of the binary as well. But what biology is saying is that typically men are more muscular than women, and women have more fat content and muscle. And this is just the science behind it. And muscle is more water soluble. So they're able to break down the alcohol and not be as incapacitated as, say, a woman who has a higher fat content. And so things like that are also taken into play when you talk about the power dynamics. And especially because the question comes up a lot, what happens if both parties are drunk or both parties are under the influence? A lot of times, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the law will resort to that fact about just the biology and the makeup of men and women.
What about Jean Twenge? I know we talked a little bit about her, and she talks about the effects of screen time. Would either of you like to share a little bit about how that also plays into this power dynamic?
Sure. I mean, I'm a huge fan, as you know, because we can talk about Dr. Twenge and her research, and I highly recommend the TEDx talk or Googling. The book that I draw upon most often is called iGen, as if, Apple, they're like attached to their phones, because smartphone usage is ubiquitous among this age group, and it really cuts across the demographic factors, and unlike anything else. So you think of perhaps your teen, the teen the adolescent that now they truly do think of that phone as an extension of the arm, of an extension of self. And they have a different relationship than, say, a Gen Xer like I am, or others. I would love sometimes to be very separate from my various devices, but they have only know them. They're the generation who's grown up from the start as digital natives, nonstop. And that means that they are very used to doing lots of things online that maybe you think you wouldn't do online, or that was not how we dated and flirted and learned things and asked questions. They use the device for everything. They are always on it, as you know. But it does also mean that when we want them to look up for the phone, or they do put their phones down and they're engaging in, making out or sexual activity, they have not developed appropriate communication skills for what they're really getting into. And the research on this Gen Z, this younger generation, and they are different from millennials, and the millennials want you to know that, okay? But they really are. There are comparison charts. Yeah, they really are. Millennials feel strongly about this. I have many millennials on my team. And it's striking. And you won't see it at first glance too, because I am Gen X, as I mentioned. And so you might think, oh, young people today, but it's helpful when we're tackling this topic to know their values differ and their communication methods and preferences differ. Their preferred social media is different, and we are trying to engage them. So I can't just use the one I know. I have to use the one that they know. That means that they actually might be much more comfortable being sexual beings through the device than they are in person with one another. And it's often sexual activity at a later age than millennials, at a later age than Gen Xers began, and baby boomers. when we're talking in terms of person-to-person, skin-to-skin contact. So something like sending the picture to one another, perhaps consensually, does not feel as intimate as it might seem to you if you're a parent, or it doesn't seem as intimate or as serious in all situations as engaging in the in-person physical act might. They really do think about it differently. And if we're going to tackle the various forms of sexual misconduct, many of which are now digital or virtual, we just have to acknowledge that reality.
Thank you, Cara, so much. Definitely a reminder for all teenage parents that have to deal with the phone on a regular basis. On that note, kind of the next phase I'd like to go into is rape culture in our society. I think we've all talked about how there are tolerance for certain unacceptable behaviors that we let just kind of slide past us. And I'm thinking of catcalling, locker room talk, ways that we dress. And I'd like to just introduce this topic. I'm going to have Cara and Jordan speak more about it, but I would like to show a quick video of Charlie Coleman, who talks about rape culture and specifically the rape of his sister.
My name's Charlie Coleman, and my sister was sexually assaulted by a group of guys that I thought were my friends and left to die in my yard in sub-freezing weather. They were my teammates. I ate with them at lunch. I had classes with them 3 or 4 hours a day. They were close enough to me, they know they could have called me and I would have came and got her at 2 in the morning or whatever time. But instead, the guys, they sat there, they kind of egged it on, they took picture and video, and they let it happen. The idea of masculinity, people think that you have to dominate everything in the world. You have to dominate in the workforce. You have to dominate in the weight room, the ball field. You don't want to hear no. People that don't take no for an answer, people that succeed in life. You strive for the best all the time. You got to prove your masculinity. We see comments being made about women and saying, oh, it's just locker room talk, boys will be boys. That's accepting the culture as it is and allowing it to grow. I don't think being a bystander that doesn't do anything is okay. People think that's the right thing to do because when we were growing up, everybody had heard, mind your own business. We're not taught to step in and defend somebody who can't defend themselves. Even there are situations where girls more open to their sexual life or something like that. Some people don't think twice about it because they're like, oh, well, she normally goes and sleeps around. When you categorize them, it doesn't mean that they want that just based on what they're wearing or what they've done with other people in the past. It doesn't matter who they are. They're a person. Everybody says no means no, but it goes a lot deeper than that and people don't realize it. If someone's quiet or doesn't flat out say yes or engage themselves in it, you can't say that they're consenting because you can take the girl back to your room or go back to her room with her. And if she wakes up the next day and that's not something she remembers or remembers consenting to or wanted, then you are very much part of the problem. If there's one thing in this world I think that young men need to learn to carry on through their lives is respect for another. Start by talking about, you have to respect this person. It's not about what she's wearing. If a kid comes home at 13 years old and talking with his friends about, oh my God, did you see her butt today in social studies? Or the volleyball team would go on their daily run past the field and they'd be like, oh my gosh, those spandex kind of thing. It's people talk like that. It's actually more disgusting than we see it as. And it happens all too often because we haven't been taught. It is up to the parents, the role models, the older brothers, the older sisters, to start putting these ideas in kids' heads that this is not a thing that's okay.
So, Cara and Jordan, I think this video ends on, we have to have role models. We have to have those in our community that are telling us that some of the things that we ought to be true are just not okay anymore. Have you seen that happen on college campuses or folks that you've worked with to make these efforts? I think the Vanderbilt video we showed in the beginning was a great example of what the Vanderbilt community did, the upperclassmen did for the freshmen that were coming on campus is one great example. But what else is out there that you think this generation is working on to change the rape culture?
Jordan, you want to start or you want me to?
Go ahead,
Go
Cara.
ahead.
You go first.
They have a high level of awareness. Okay, so I don't think it starts early enough. I need you all to talk to the young people in your life maybe 5 years before you think you need to. I really do. Otherwise, I'm getting them on the college campus around age 18 and trying to make up for a lot of lost time. But they've heard it, right? So see, that video was from Teen Vogue. They're getting a lot of information on the topic. And when we talk to the individual man, I mean, they're good people. It's not that they're good people, and they want to do good things, and they don't know what to do, but they really don't know what to do. So on the college campus, I have a lot of students with awareness and concern that come to my office and say, what can we do? That video was definitely their idea, from a few years ago. They want bystander intervention, and that's what we're offering. The public health model is really emphasizing bystander intervention as our best possible tool. Because
tell us a little more about that, Cara.
Sure.
Define bystander intervention and actually what you teach people to do when they're in that role.
Yes. So you all are bystanders just by living and navigating the world. You cannot choose it, you just are. And sometimes we see things, and sometimes we think we should do something, and a lot of times we don't. And Charlie mentions it in the video too. Charlie Coleman mentions it. And he's saying, you've been taught to mind your own business. And a lot of students still are taught to mind their own business. But what that means is they're just watching these things happen, and no one knows what to do, and no one does anything. And with really devastating consequences. You can't leave it to the people like me and Jordan. Okay, because eventually I go home. I am not at the parties. I'm not in the residence hall. It can't be my staff of 5 people who solve all of this in our community. It has to be taken up by others. And bystander intervention is that call to action. They try to make it simple. There are different curriculums, and many colleges and universities are using them. And so Green Dot is a national curriculum, bringing in the bystander, MVP, Step Up, and then many colleges and universities either brand or design their own. And it's really built on the same research foundation about wanting to make sure that we're mobilizing people to stand up and say that this is wrong, or to do something, or to help. Hopefully, we're on the prevention side and we can stop something before it happens, or we can disrupt something in the middle of happening before it escalates. But also we want to make sure that we're supporting people who've experienced it, because how we respond sends a message to everyone else about what will be tolerated in our community. Usually there are strategies. We talk about 5 Ds of bystander intervention at Vanderbilt. So you can confront a situation directly. You can create a distraction. This works great. Actually, most of the college students I deal with prefer this method.
What's the distraction?
Well,
I'm scared to ask.
The best thing is to be like, hey, your car's getting towed. So then you going up to say
and
this.
That happens at Vanderbilt a lot.
It does indeed.
That happens at Vanderbilt a lot.
To park where they shouldn't.
Yeah.
We are serious about parking at Vanderbilt. But it's a perfect excuse, something like that, or using the buddy system. I mean, it's not new, but it's still very effective. So if you see someone and one person is much more intoxicated than the other, that's concerning, right? That's a warning sign of the night progressing where consent might be violated or not obtained. And so we want the concerned bystander who sees, and maybe they see someone being sloppy and intoxicated. And again, as Jordan mentioned, it's not as simple as have they had 3 beers. They always ask that question. How many is too many, Cara? What if we both have 3 drinks? Well, they're having more than 3 drinks, I need to tell you. But also body, medicine, sleep, all of these things factor into that. So what I need them to do is to learn the warning signs of intoxication and intervene in some way. This is where I have them lean into gender norms. For example, women, if you're out, you can really talk to almost any other woman in a bathroom, in a bar. You can act like you know each other. you can go to the bathroom in groups, right? So there's an exit strategy, really, whether you're trying to grab the person you think is too intoxicated, or you're trying to get away from someone who is creepy and just giving you, unsafe feelings, right? So that's one strategy. What's really important, like none of this is that difficult, but what's really important is talking through the strategies with the young person, because they have not thought through. Sometimes the people we offer trainings to don't really want to be there. And one time in a group of, it was young men, again, they said, they offered this one up. They're like, what if we say, look, a giraffe? And I'm like, look, I'll take it, because if you yell, look, a giraffe in our dining hall, that is definitely going to cause a reaction. There doesn't have to really be a giraffe. It can also be amusing. You can stand too close to someone for US, spacing norms. And that'll stop an escalating argument, because they'll be like, what are you doing? Or you can ask for directions and act like you're lost. So the distraction, there's lots of different forms it can take.
Those are great examples, really, because I think I would love for our audience to be able to share with their kids or nieces or grandparents, what are some things you can do? Jordan, do you have some techniques that you use in your statewide training?
I think I really wanted to piggyback off what Cara said. Intervening in situations is great, but it isn't just in those situations where you see someone intoxicated or an attempted assault may be about to occur. Rape culture starts at the bare bones. It's the normalization of locker room banter. It's the boys will be boys. It's the sexist and really inappropriate jokes. Bystander intervention can start at that level as well. So especially now, to Cara's point about this new generation being on their smartphones a lot more, we see a lot of these sexist jokes and things like that showing up on social media. So are we encouraging them to intervene even on those platforms? When you see it, are you reporting it? If it's your friend that's guilty of saying something, are you saying, hey, that's not appropriate for you to say, or this isn't okay, or we won't tolerate these type of things? And so just kind of normalizing it on all levels of assault, or because it does exist on a spectrum. We know that sexual violence doesn't just start with rape. It starts with those behaviors and attitudes that people have about women, about who can be assaulted, about what rape actually looks like. And I think just starting there would be key as well.
Well, and I also wanted to add, I think there's quite a bit in the literature about rape culture associated with Greek life and athletic events. Would, Cara, maybe you could say a little bit about that on Vandy campus?
Yeah, it's really true on any campus that has Greek life. And this is something that the colleges and universities can't always change, even if they want to. It's who has structural control of the scene of the party. And many of the organizations themselves, all the way up at their national headquarters level, are saying that fraternities can have alcohol at events and many sororities cannot have alcohol. So that the sororities could not host the party even if they wanted to, because they're not allowed to have that many people or that type of alcohol, which leaves fraternity men in control of the social scene on campus. Even for, many students are not in a Greek letter organization, but they feel like their only social options are at the fraternity party. Well, then who is choosing the alcohol? Who's deciding where it is? Who is deciding which bathrooms to use? Who is deciding if we're going to violate the alcohol policies or not, right? So many colleges and universities have switched to beer only. We're trying to limit the effects of intoxication and limit consumption. Beer can be filling, depends on what you drink, but the lower alcohol content sometimes. We're worried about them doing shots. We're worried about punch bowls, that used to be made with like a very high grain alcohol. We're worried about drinking games, anything that's going to speed up that consumption and lead to, severe intoxication. And, it's not the students themselves that support this gendered, structure. Often when I'm lobbying for change around this, I have difficulty with sorority moms or sorority leadership at the national level who are not quite understanding why I might want a sorority to host the party. But I know if the sorority hosts the party, the lighting will be better, that they will not put younger members in charge of party patrol or sober monitors. So oftentimes the people who are responsible for party patrol at a fraternity party are the new members, the younger members.
Because I think a lot of Panhellenic councils now require that there has to be someone on patrol within your organization. So putting a Rashee in that position, there obviously is an automatic power.
Yes. If they haven't joined or if they're a new member, well, like my first year new member is not going to go up to like Joe Senior and be like, hey man, I think she's too drunk, right? We're asking these, for this age group, superhuman task to them. This is why they like distract, because now men will tell you that they like direct best among the strategies and that they will confront situations directly. Back to that masculinity that Jordan was talking about. They think they have to perform masculinity, but when they're in the moment, they won't choose the direct confrontation. So they need a different way out. And so they can also delegate, delay, and maybe document, so we're seeing a lot of use of photos and videos. So hopefully we can use some of those photos and videos for good as well.
Thank you so much. Okay.
If I could just add,
yes,
just the university that I attended, just the difference between campus and campus. The fraternity houses were not school property at all. So the school had no say in regulating how they partied or what they had because it was off-campus housing. But the sorority housing were on campus. They were considered student housing and things like that. And that goes back into the power dynamics and just keeping in mind the differences between college campuses across the state and across the country.
Some people always ask me, like, shouldn't we just outlaw, drinking? And I'm like, all you're going to do is push it across the street. And that does not help me do my job. Having some policies and some surveillance and some accountability through university procedures helps. But what Jordan is pointing out is you have to look at the histories of those organizations too. And the financial resources are impacted by all the forms of discrimination that come up in the United States, right? And who remains most resourced? That's where I often have the most problems.
Let's leave with this video, which will follow a slide with some additional resources to our research library as well on all the topics that we discussed tonight in much more detail. So here's the video.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, no thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they are unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea, and they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea, and they said yes, but in the time it took you to boil the kettle or brew the tea and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down, make sure the unconscious person is safe, and this is the important part again, don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away, make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.